The first time he saw them, he wasn't looking for anything supernatural. He was 7 years old, barefoot in the dust in front of his house, and all he wanted was to pick up the little metal toy that had slipped from his fingers. He bent down, grabbed it, and when he lifted his head again, the world had changed. A ring of figures stood around him, too small to be women, too tall to be dolls, silent and smiling like they'd been waiting for him to notice. Their eyes were bright in a way that made his stomach tighten. And then one of them spoke, not with a voice that traveled through air, but with a voice that appeared inside his skull as if it had always lived there. He told me this years later, when we were old enough to laugh at childhood fears, old enough to pretend we were immune to stories that belonged to villages and grandparents and the kind of darkness that doesn't exist in cities. But he didn't laugh. He never even smiled when he talked about it. He spoke carefully, like someone describing an accident scene, afraid the wrong detail might pull the memory back into motion. He grew up in a small village not far from Jagodina, one of those places where roads narrow into cracked lanes, and the fields come right up to the fences. The houses stand apart, like they're giving each other space to breathe. At night, the countryside goes quiet, in a way that makes you hear your own thoughts. And when the wind shifts, you can tell exactly where it's coming from, because there's nothing else to mask it. People there don't say fairies the way children's books do. They say vile, and they don't say it lightly. In that village, veil were not decorations on greeting cards. They were rules. They were warnings. They were the reason you didn't whistle after sunset, the reason you didn't pour hot water into the yard without saying a word first, the reason you didn't step into certain patches of grass where the ground looked too smooth, too untouched. Everyone there had a story, he told me. Even people who pretended they didn't believe. The ones who said it was nonsense always had the most rules. His grandfather, Deda, was the one who treated it as something practical, like weather. You don't argue with fog. You learn how to walk in it. When he was small, his world was the house, the yard, and the strip of road where the neighbors sometimes passed with baskets or tools. Beyond that were orchards, cornfields, and the line of trees that marked the beginning of the wilder land, brush and uneven hills, places where the light looked different even at noon. His grandmother warned him not to go there alone, and when he asked why, she said, because that's where they like to watch. He didn't understand who they were at first. Not really. The adults spoke in half sentences. Don't go there. Don't do that. Don't answer if you hear your name. Like there was a presence in the village that didn't need to be introduced. It was part of the air. He said the first sign wasn't seeing them. It was the way the village could suddenly feel rearranged. Sometimes, he told me, I'd walk the same path I walked every day, and it would feel longer. Or I'd turn a corner and a house would seem farther away, like the space stretched, like something didn't want you to arrive. As a child, he accepted that feeling the way kids accept weird dreams. He didn't have words for it. He just knew that once in a while he'd get a chill and his mouth would go dry, and he'd hurry home because something in him recognized the sensation as danger. His grandfather noticed those moments. He didn't ask questions. He would just glance up from whatever he was doing and say, "Come inside." It wasn't until later that he understood why his grandfather never teased him for being scared. In that village, fear wasn't a weakness. Fear was information. One afternoon in early summer, He remembers it because the air smelled like cut grass and the sky was too bright. He was playing in front of the house, not far from the gate, where the ground was packed down from footsteps. His toy slipped, bounced once and landed near his feet. A normal moment, nothing dramatic. He bent down to pick it up. When he straightened again, the yard was not empty. At first he thought it was the neighbor's daughters, maybe visiting. But the figures weren't walking through the gate. They were already there, arranged in a circle around him as if they'd formed while his head was lowered. He described them as small but not child small, with limbs too long and movements too smooth, like water shaped into bodies. Their hair looked pale in the sun, not white exactly, more like the color of dry straw. Their faces were pretty in a way that didn't invite trust, the kind of beauty that feels like a mask. "I didn't hear footsteps," he said. "I didn't hear anything. I just looked up and they were there." He tried to call out, but his voice snagged, his throat closed, not from choking but from a sudden certainty that making the wrong sound would make things worse. Then one of them spoke. He couldn't repeat the words, not because he forgot them, but because he claimed they weren't words the way we understand words. He said it felt like being spoken through, like the voice bypassed his ears and touched something deeper. He answered without thinking. That was the strangest part, he told me. He didn't choose to talk. The conversation started the way a dream starts. You're suddenly in the middle of it, and it makes sense in the moment, even if it would make no sense afterward. He spoke to them in a child's voice, polite and eager at first, as if he'd been introduced to guests. They smiled wider, and the circle seemed to tighten, not with steps, but with a subtle shift in the air, like the yard itself leaned inward. "What did they say?" I asked him once. He looked at me for a long time before answering. "They were asking questions," he said. But it wasn't curiosity. It was like checking. Like they were making sure I was the same person they remembered. He didn't remember being with them before. But in that moment, under their gaze, he felt as if he had always known them, as if they had always been a possibility in the corner of his vision. He said their eyes were the worst part. Not their faces, not their smiles, their eyes. They looked like they were enjoying it, he told me. Not the talking, the fact that I was stuck there, like they were tasting my fear. He didn't know how long it lasted. Time didn't move normally in his memory of it. The sun was bright, the shadows sharp, and yet it felt like evening inside his chest, cool and heavy. At some point he noticed that he couldn't feel the breeze anymore. Everything had gone still. Even insects seemed to have stopped. Then his grandfather shouted his name. The sound came from far away and close at the same time, like a voice echoing inside a bottle. His grandfather stood at the doorway, squinting into the yard. He saw his grandson standing alone, speaking to empty air. But his grandfather didn't look confused. He looked angry. He didn't run out immediately. He stepped forward slowly, as if approaching something that could lash out. He called again, sharper this time, and his grandson felt the circle tighten, felt the air press. His grandfather's eyes stayed fixed not on the boy, but around him, on the space the vial occupied, even if he couldn't see them directly. That detail mattered, the way he told it, the way the old man's gaze moved as if tracking shapes. He couldn't see them, the boy said, but he knew exactly where they were. His grandfather raised his voice. "Don't answer," he barked in the language of someone who had said those words before. "Don't talk. Come here." The boy tried to move. His legs trembled but didn't obey. It felt like the ground held him, gentle but firm, like hands around his ankles. One of the Vile leaned closer. Her face hovered inches from his, her smile too wide to be kind. The voice inside his head became softer, almost affectionate. He couldn't translate it later, but he understood the feeling. Stay with us. You're already ours. He did what children do when adults are frightened. He tried to fix it. He tried to make it normal. He spoke again, pleading, explaining, bargaining in the rambling way kids do, telling the invisible figures that his grandfather was calling, that he had to go, that he'd come back later, maybe. That's when his grandfather came into the yard. He didn't rush. He approached like a man walking into deep water, step by step, measuring the distance. His face was tense, jaw clenched, but his hands were steady. He said something under his breath, half prayer, half warning, and reached into his pocket. The boy remembers the object because it was so ordinary, a matchbox. His grandfather took out a match and struck it. The sound was small, the scratch of wood against strip, but the effect was immediate. The stillness shattered. The air snapped back into motion. A gust of wind swept through the yard, as if the world had been holding its breath and finally released it. The circle broke. He didn't see them run the way people run. He said it was more like the sunlight swallowed them, like the yard suddenly had room for them to vanish into. One moment they were close enough to feel. The next moment the space around him was empty again, leaving only the echo of their presence like heat after a flame. He stumbled, and his grandfather caught him before he fell. His grandfather didn't ask, "Who were you talking to?" He didn't say, "What happened?" He didn't need to. He held the burning match between them, keeping it lit as they moved toward the house, and his voice stayed low and furious. "Never touch them," he said. "Never reach, never invite. You hear me?" The boy sobbed because he understood for the first time that it wasn't a game. It wasn't imagination. The adult fear in his grandfather's face told him the truth, in a way no explanation could. "I tried to reach out," the boy admitted to me later. "I wanted to touch one, just to see if it was real." His grandfather's grip tightened at that confession, like the old man could feel it happening even after it was over. The match crackled. The flame wavered but stayed alive. "You don't touch," his grandfather repeated. "You don't give your hand." In the kitchen, his grandmother went pale when she saw his face. She didn't ask questions either. She covered the windows with a cloth as if the yard could look back in. She poured water into a bowl and tossed salt into it with shaking fingers. His grandfather kept striking matches until the air smelled like sulfur. Then he finally sat down and pressed the last flame to a candle so it would stay. For the rest of that day, the boy was not allowed outside, not even to the porch. His grandfather sat by the door with the candle burning, watching the yard as if expecting something to step out of the light. That night the boy couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ring of faces, the two wide smiles. He heard that voice inside his head, not as words, but as a feeling. "We will meet again." He told his grandfather he was scared. His grandfather didn't soothe him with lies. He didn't say there was nothing there. He said, "Good. Be scared. Fear keeps you from being stupid." He said other people in the village had stories. Some were like his, children lured into talking, into wandering. Others were worse. There was a woman, his grandfather said quietly, who went to the river at dusk. She heard singing. She followed it. She came back 3 days later with her shoes in her hands, hair full of leaves, and she didn't remember her own name. Another man had walked through a field and stepped into a patch of grass that looked untouched. He swore the sky changed color. When he finally found his way home, he'd been gone 1 hour by the village clock, but his beard had grown as if he'd been away for weeks. Some stories ended with people being found miles away, confused and silent, with scratches on their arms like they'd been dragged through thorns. Others ended with people not being found at all. In the village, they didn't call it abduction. They called it being taken to dance. The boy listened to these stories with a sick feeling, because part of him recognized the tone. The adults weren't telling fairy tales. They were sharing survival information. The trauma didn't stay in his childhood. It grew up with him. When he moved away later, to school and then to work, he thought distance would erase it. Cities have streetlights. Apartments have neighbors. You can always hear someone else's television through the wall. There's comfort in all that noise. But the vial had taught his nervous system a lesson. Reality could shift in a second. He started to hate silence. He slept with a fan on even in winter, because the hum kept his brain from listening too closely. If the fan broke, he would wake up before the room got quiet, heart racing as if something had approached. He avoided rural places. If friends suggested a weekend cabin, he made excuses. If he had to visit family in the village, he stayed inside after dark and kept lights on, even when it annoyed everyone else. He never told people the real reason. How do you explain to someone that a childhood encounter made you afraid of still air? Sometimes, though, something would remind him, and his whole body would react before his mind caught up. A sudden drop in sound, a weird shift in wind. The way tall grass can look like a smooth patch if it lies just right. He told me there were nights when he woke up with the taste of sulfur in his mouth, like he'd been striking matches in his sleep. And then he told me the detail he'd never told anyone else. After that day in the yard, his grandfather had made a habit. He always carried matches, the boy said. Always. Even when he didn't smoke. Even when he went to the orchard. If he went to check the animals, matches. If he went to the neighbor's house, matches. When the boy asked why, his grandfather said, "Fire remembers what it is. They don't like things that remember." As a teenager, the boy started to push back, the way teenagers do. He wanted to believe the old superstitions were just stories. He wanted to prove he was smarter than his fear. One summer evening, he and 2 friends walked along the edge of the trees, daring each other to go farther. They threw stones, laughed too loudly, acted brave. The boy tried to feel normal. Then the sound of insects stopped. It happened so cleanly that all 3 of them noticed at the same time. One moment the air was full of buzzing and chirping. The next moment it was as if someone had pressed a hand over the village's mouth. His friends froze. The boy's stomach dropped and he tasted fear like metal. One of the friends whispered, "Did you hear that?" There was no that. There was only the absence of everything. The boy didn't wait for a sign. He grabbed both of them and dragged them back toward the houses. And when they stumbled and protested, he snapped, "Run!" They ran, and behind them the trees rustled even though there was no wind. The boy refused to look back. When they reached his yard, his grandfather was already on the porch, holding a lit match like he'd known. His friends stared at the tiny flame, confused, but they didn't joke. Something in the old man's face shut down humor. He stood there, match burning, eyes scanning the darkness between the trees. The boy never went near that edge again. Years later, after his grandfather died, the boy returned to the village for the funeral. It was winter. The fields were brown, the air sharp, and the nights came early. The house felt smaller without the old man in it. The porch creaked differently. The yard looked the same, but the protection was gone. He found his grandfather's matchbox in a drawer. He didn't take it at first. He told himself it was superstition, a relic, a habit left over from an old man's fear. But on the second night, while he lay in the guest bed listening to the house settle, he heard something outside. Not footsteps, not an animal. A soft sound, like fingernails on wood. He sat up, heart pounding. The sound came again, from the direction of the front door. Slow, patient, deliberate. As if someone wanted him to know they were there. He didn't move. He listened. Then very faintly, he heard it. Something like a voice trying to form words through the crack under the door. Not speaking out loud, pressing itself against reality. He reached for his phone to turn on the flashlight, and his hands shook so hard he almost dropped it. He told himself it was the wind, the old door, the house, but the air had that same stillness he remembered from childhood, that unnatural pause. Even the radiator seemed quiet. Silence thickened until it felt like pressure against his ears. He got out of bed and walked to the drawer. He took the matchbox. His fingers fumbled, clumsy with fear. He slid out a match, held it between thumb and forefinger, and for a second he couldn't make himself strike it, because doing so meant admitting what he already knew. The scratching outside the door continued, steady as breathing. He struck the match. The flame blossomed, small and bright. The smell of sulfur filled his nose, and with it came relief so intense it felt like nausea. The air shifted. The pressure eased. Somewhere outside, something moved away too quickly to be human. He held the match until it burned his fingers and went out. The next morning he found marks on the outside of the door, 3 shallow scratches, close together, exactly the height of a child's hand. He didn't tell his family. He didn't ask the neighbors if they'd heard anything. He didn't want to invite conversation about it, because in that village, talking about it sometimes made it closer. He left the next day and never slept in that house again. When he told me all of this, he wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to explain why his eyes always tracked shadows in a room, why he flinched at sudden silence, why he never laughed at folklore. He stopped speaking for a moment, and I expected the story to be over. But then he said something that made my skin prickle. "I didn't tell you the worst part," he said. I asked him what he meant. He took a slow breath, the way people do when they're about to say something that still has teeth. "When I was in that circle," he said, "one of them leaned in and looked at my hands, like she liked them, like she was choosing." He paused, and when my grandfather lit the match, they ran. But before they did, I felt it. I felt something touch my fingers, not a hand, not skin, more like cold air shaped into fingertips. He held up his right hand as he spoke, and I saw what he wanted me to see, the faint pale line on his palm, as if a scar had been drawn there long ago. It was subtle. It could have been from anything, but he looked at it like it belonged to someone else. "I think," he said quietly, "I almost gave them something, without meaning to." I asked him if he'd ever seen them again. He shook his head, then hesitated, then corrected himself. "Not like that," he said. "Not in daylight, not in a circle." He looked past me as if remembering something he didn't want to bring closer. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I hear my name, not out loud, inside, the way they spoke." He swallowed. "And sometimes I wake up at the same time my grandfather used to wake up. I don't even check the clock anymore because I already know. It's always the same minute." I asked him what minute. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on the scar line on his palm. 2:17, he said. He laughed then, one short sound with no humor in it. "I live in a building now," he said, as if that should make him safe. "Thick walls, Neighbors, streetlights. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. But every now and then, when everything is quiet, I swear I can hear it again. Not scratching on the door, not in the trees. He lowered his voice, inside the walls. I wanted to tell him it was stress, trauma, old fear finding new shapes. I wanted to give him a clean explanation, something modern and rational. But the truth was, while he spoke, I kept noticing the way the room's silence seemed to deepen, as if the space itself was listening. He finished his drink. His hands didn't stop trembling until he put the glass down. Before he left, he said one last thing, casually, like an afterthought. My grandfather used to say, he told me, that fire remembers what it is. He stood up, pulled on his jacket, and gave me a tired smile. I started carrying matches, he said, just in case. After he went home, I stayed awake for a long time. Not because I believed in Vile the way villagers believe, but because the story had slipped under my skin and taken root. Because the details felt too specific to be invented. The minute on the clock, the match, the old man's certainty. At some point, I finally fell asleep. I woke up hours later in total silence. No traffic, no hum of appliances, no distant voices. The kind of silence you only get when something is missing. My throat tightened. I didn't want to check the time, but my hand moved anyway, drawn by the same compulsive need that makes people look at car wrecks. 2:17. In the darkness, I heard a soft sound. Not from the window, not from the hallway, from inside the wall behind my bed. 3 light taps, a pause, and then a long, patient scrape, like fingernails finding the grain of wood. I lay perfectly still, heart pounding, and I remembered the boy's words, "Don't answer if you hear your name." Then I heard it, not with my ears, but inside my head, close and intimate as thought. My name, spoken the way a smile can be sharp, and somewhere in the dark, something seemed to wait for me to respond.